Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. So here we are once again in our special podcast series about prayer in honor of Elul, based on the Rebbe Rashab's Tractate, Kuntres Hatefilla, the Tractate on Prayer. And before we get further into this tractate, I thought that now might be a good time to give a little bit of a recap, a review of where we've gotten up to so far. And lucky for me, the Rebbe Rashab actually gives an easy way to do this, because at the end of each of his chapters, he actually provides a little couple of line summary to summarize the main points of each chapter. And I think that, reviewing in this way, this is actually so essential. It's so essential to review what you learn. I know for me personally, and I know that there are many teachings in Torah that back up this idea that reviewing is actually more important in a certain sense than the actual learning itself. Like when you learn something for the first time, it kind of, just gets into your mind, but it's not until you review it maybe once, twice, many times over that it really becomes more ingrained and instilled within you. And bearing in mind that the whole topic of this tractate is this idea of meditation, which really is, as we'll see, a certain type of intellectual contemplation and focus, I think really focusing on the review and trying to really grasp these concepts to the best of our ability really fits with this. So we started off the tractate. The very first chapter of the tractate was all about the virtue of this thing known as hitbonenut, which we often translate to mean meditation. And we haven't quite yet defined what that means exactly. We know that the word hitbonenut comes from the root of the word bina. So it's something related to bina, which means understanding or analysis. And so the first chapter was really all about the virtue of hitbonenut, the virtue of why it's important. In terms of our service of God, and specifically this type of hitbonenut on the greatness of God and on his loftiness. And we brought up this idea of istakla beikar de malka, that looking at the preciousness of the king is a type of like a cleaving that happens, a dveikus, we call it in Hebrew, to God. That somehow this process of meditation, when we learn how to meditate on, in such a way that focuses on God's greatness, God's preciousness, this can actually lead us to a place of total unity with God, where we become totally absorbed and lose our own sense of self as a self apart from God. Now, in chapter 2, we started to bring in this idea of prayer, because as many people are already aware, and we talk about this more in this tractate, this idea of meditation and prayer are really very, very intertwined and linked. And many people understand that there is an idea of utilizing meditation as a way to enhance one's prayer. Many people also realize that learning before praying, like learning chassidus or something like that, is a great thing to do, and kind of think of this as like being the way to link meditation to prayer. That if a person takes time to learn chassidus before they pray, then they've done that. They've added in a little bit more meaning, a little bit more meditation into their prayer. But in chapter 2, the Rebbe Rashab actually tells us that the learning that we do and the coming to understand Chassidus is actually just a preparation for the actual meditation that is to happen during prayer itself. And that this meditation, this hisbonenus, it needs to be done in a lengthy way and in a very internalized way in order for it to really be something lasting, to affect lasting changes. Because as we also mentioned earlier in the tractate, the whole point of prayer, or at least what prayer should be, is to affect change in ourselves, to affect self-transformation, transformation of our midos, of our character traits. And the only way the Rebbe Rashab tells us that this can happen is if we really learn how to meditate during the prayer itself, and in a very lengthy and deep way. Now, chapter 3, which is what we focused on in the previous episode, was a very interesting one. First of all, because the entire chapter was in parentheses. And secondly, because it was really all about warning us what not to do, and like the false way that a person might think about, especially younger people, younger students, let's say, might come to think of this meditation during prayer. One might make the mistake that that during prayer, the way to meditate and tap into this like meditative aspect of prayer is to focus on the words and try to come up with all kinds of different explanations of the words and deep ideas, and like innovative concepts and stuff like that, and insights. And the Rebbe Rashab totally pushes this down, and he says this is not at all the point. This is not at all meditation. It has nothing to do with that. In fact, what a person should be doing is, instead of trying to innovate new ideas, they should actually be learning. They should make themselves like a humble vessel for learning Chassidus. And in this learning of Chassidus, in this way, this will lead them to a much deeper place and to a much more truthful place in terms of connecting with God and connecting with the prayer. So that leads us to today's chapter, chapter 4, in which we're finally going to start learning about how to meditate. So we've spoken about the virtue of meditation. We've spoken about the connection of meditation and prayer. We've spoken about what not to do. So what do we do? How do we actually meditate? So here we go. So the Rebbe Rashab begins, and he says that the true service in exerting oneself in prayer is with the exertion of the soul and the exertion of the flesh. So prayer should be a very active process. Like it should really be a workout both for one's soul and a workout for one's body even. This is one of the reasons why prayer is called avoda, which means work. And so what do we mean by this? How is prayer workout for our body? We're not doing jumping jacks and push-ups while we pray, right? So what is this? Is that we're actually supposed to be exerting our brain with great iyun, with great focus, and with a great connection in the concept, meaning in some kind of Hasidic, godly type of concept. And for this, we need a long time, like maybe an hour or more, to really widen our understanding and our hitbonenut, our meditation, on all of the different aspects of this concept. Meaning to say, like a concept in Chassidus, a certain godly idea. And we should actually one should be bringing themselves close to this thing through many different explanations that are both known to him from before, or he suddenly becomes aware of, like they come to him while he's learning. So now just a note on this might sound a little confusing, because in the previous chapter, didn't we talk about how, innovation, coming up with your own insights isn't really the way to go. So that's true, especially if like a person's focus is all about coming up with new insights and meanings of the words of the prayer. But here, the Rebbe Rashab is actually talking about something a little bit differently. Here, the person is focusing on learning, so it is more of a receptive process. It's not that they're sitting there and being creative and coming up with their own ideas, but through the process of learning in this more receptive way, we do at the same time, we want to make these ideas palatable to us. We want to understand them. We want them to be personal. We want them to be relatable. So in that process of thinking about it and thinking about all the details and the applications to our lives, we definitely will most probably have some aha moments where we do come up with like this new idea and this new way that we can apply the concept. That's fine, and that's encouraged. That's actually a really good thing. And the Rebbe Rashab says that it's, this type of learning, this type of meditation is not like just like the way you would learn a topic in just like a regular way, in like sort of just like an intellectual detached way, but rather this practice of hisbonenus that we're talking about needs to be with a real essential connection to the essence of the topic that is being understood in his mind. And connecting to the essence of the idea in this way is what's going to allow him to really understand this topic in all of its many details. to the point that he will eventually come to understand it even more and in a better way than he did before. Now, an interesting bracket here is where the Rebbe Rashab says that it's specifically tapping into the essence of an idea that's going to bring out its revelation. And he specifies we don't mean like the kind of essential point of the idea, but rather the essence of the idea itself. So it's not, like when I was giving those summaries before of each chapter, that was sort of like more like the latter case. Those little summaries at the end of each chapter is like kind of like the essential point. Like the essential point of the chapter was this idea and that idea, right? But then there's something else about like getting to the essence of an idea, which is a much, much deeper process. It's sort of like, the point that connects all of the details of an idea, all of the details of a study. And that's where we want to get to in our meditative process. We want to be delving and digging and trying to reach and connect to that essence. And we want to get there. We want to really strive for that essence until it actually becomes grasped in our mind and like rests in our mind. And from the mind, it then gets drawn down into the heart. And then it actually, he's actually going to feel the light within his heart. So it's interesting because, like we mentioned before, the type of meditation that we're talking about here, this hitbonenut meditation, is very different than what we typically think about in terms as being meditation. Like, typically we picture somebody sitting on a mountaintop, sitting cross-legged, let's say, and kind of trying not to think or trying to focus on just the sounds around them or something like that. But it's, it's more of like a passive kind of process. It's not what one would call an intellectual kind of process. It might be a more emotional kind of process, like they're, getting in touch with their feelings. Here, we're actually starting with the mind. It is a very intellectual process. We start with studying and thinking very, very deeply. It's a very intellectual process. But the whole idea is that it's not to stay in the mind, that through this process of hitbonenut, what we're actually doing, and the whole point of it, is to generate emotions within our heart, but in a way that it originates in the mind. And that when we do this type of meditation properly, then the heart will get aroused on its own. So the heart will respond to the mind. So the heart, the Rebbe Rashab says, hears and feels the godly idea, the godly concept that is understood inside of the mind. And now, how does this happen, right? So that's a good question, because we know there's the intellect, the mind, and then there's the heart. And they're two very different beasts. Like the mind is cold, it's detached, it's analytical, all of that. The heart is like the total polar opposite of that. It's fiery, emotional, all of that stuff. So how does this connection happen between the mind and the heart? This is through a very interesting function, which is known as da'as, which we're actually going to talk about a lot more in the next chapter. But for now, we are going to bring it up somewhat. So the Rebbe Rashab mentions that there's this attribute known as da'at, often translated as knowledge, but really, translations are so inadequate for this kind of stuff. So for now, we're going to just use that word da'at, which connotes connection. Like we know the famous example of this is that in the famous story in Bereshis with Adam and Chava, when it describes Adam uniting with Chava in an intimate way, it says Adam yada et Chava, Adam knew Eve. So the attribute of das is somehow it serves as a connecting force for many things, in this case between the mind and the heart. And so here the Rebbe Rashab says that the das inside of the mind, so the das is actually in the mind, it spreads out and goes into the heart. So it really connects the mind and the heart. And then just a little side note in brackets here, the Rebbe Rashab says that the heart is then subdivided into chesed and gvura, which are the first two emotive attributes of the heart. This is spoken about at length within Chassidus, Tanya, and elsewhere as well. The first two attributes of the heart are chesed, which is like a kind of giving kindness, and gvura, which is like restraint, holding back. And these manifest as love and fear. So the attributes are chesed and gvura, and the way that these attributes manifest themselves in emotions, like the way what the emotions are that are produced from these two attributes, are love and fear. And now the Rebbe Rashab breaks this down a little bit more, and he says, okay, so what happens is that this godly idea that the person is meditating upon radiates in a revealed way in his mind, and this causes his mind to get excited about godliness. This excitement might manifest as a type of love of God, as a loving feeling towards God, or as a more fearful, awesome type of feeling towards God, depending on what the concept it is and depending on how the person is meditating. So you could have different focuses that are within meditation that are going to produce different kinds of results. And so another way of saying this, says the Rebbe Rashab, is that there's an excitement within the emotions within the mind. So we have our mind, we have our intellectual capacities, and then we have our emotive capacities. But within the intellectual capacities actually have an emotional element within them. There's something called the emotions of the mind. It's another topic that's discussed at length in Chassidus. And this is how we could describe this excitement that is felt within the mind, because the mind, in like a very pure way, nothing to do with intellect, wouldn't really get excited. Like the idea of excitement is an emotional experience. So yes, it's happening within the mind, but it's happening within the emotions of the mind. And then the Rebbe Rashab says that after this intellectual excitement that's happening within the emotions within the mind, then the heart follows the mind. So how does this happen? Because there's this power which draws, koach hamoshech, it's called in Hebrew, within the mind. And this is what we call das. This is this das trait that we've mentioned. And it draws, like it attracts the heart to also get excited from the excitement of the mind. And now the Rebbe Rashab now inserts a parentheses to describe how this idea of the drawing of the heart can also happen when the mind is in a state of katnut, when it's in a state of smallness, we could call it, meaning to say that like the meditation is actually not such a deep meditation, that it's happening in a more makif kind of way. It's happening in a more like peripheral kind of way. So like, basically what the Rebbe Rashab is saying here is that based on like everything we've learned so far, it sounds like in the only way that a person can get a sense of like, get excited about something in a visceral, emotional way within their heart is if they take time to really, really study something deeply and analyze it and meditate upon it and spend like an hour or more focusing on it. But he says, this isn't necessarily the case. Somebody might get excited about a concept. Like I'm sure we all had this experience where you hear a concept and you didn't necessarily spend an hour meditating and thinking about it, but it's still like, wow, it's a pretty cool concept or whatever. And you get this like emotional feeling in your heart. So that's true. But then in that case, then the feeling's going to be fleeting, most likely. So it's not actually getting drawn down into the heart. It's just sort of like moving in the direction of the heart, but it doesn't actually penetrate the heart in a real way. The same way that it would if these ideas and if this excitement and this light were to really enter into the mind in a more internal way, in a more inner, deeper kind of way. And in such a case, then the attraction of the heart, like the way that the heart would be drawn after this excitement of the mind, would be in a much more true way. And this would cause there to be a revealed love and fear within the heart in a real way. Which again, the Rebbe Rashab says is not the case if it's just a peripheral kind of makif kind of experience. That again, when there's this more peripheral kind of experience, that the person might get a little bit excited in their heart because it's going after the mind, but then it's going to leave like right away, and it will be as if they never had that experience before. So like think of maybe if you hear like an inspirational speech like on YouTube, maybe somebody on YouTube gives this like really amazing, inspiring lecture about how to be your best self by waking up at 5 a.m. and eating this and this food and that kind of diet or whatever. And in the moment you're listening to it and get really hyped up and you're like, wow, yeah, that's amazing. And like, you're really excited to do it. But then what happens is like you shut off the video and within 5 minutes, another video comes on, or you start talking to your friends or whatever, and you totally forget about it. It's not lasting because it was a more superficial experience. You heard the ideas. Yes, they were inspirational ideas, but you didn't necessarily take the time to sit and meditate upon them and really internalize them in a really true and deep way. And then another parentheses here, the Rebbe Rashab says that there's a lower level than this, or like a smaller level than this, we could say. This is where there's actually no drawing of the heart at all. So this is like, somebody watches that inspirational video and they don't get affected by it at all. It does not speak to them at all. And this is like a child who does not have any das at all, does not have this faculty of das. Like we know that like children, they don't really know the meaning of life. They don't really know the value of things. So if you show a video to a 2-year-old, or even a 5-year-old, let's say, about why eating sugar is bad for you, they're not going to really get affected by it, most likely. And, when we say 2-year-old, 5-year-old, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a biological age thing. It really could be just like, it could be like all of us. It could be really that we all have this aspect of being kind of immature in some way where we don't get affected by things at all, not even in a fleeting way. And so the Rebbe Rashab is telling us that this is directly connected to the level of das. So basically, the more we feel in our heart is going to be connected to our mind, specifically to the faculty of das, and the value of that das, like the substance of that das and the power of that das is going to be dependent upon what comes before that, namely the meditation within the mind, if it's there, if it's not there, how deep it is, and all of that. And then now going back to the main text here, this is where that big parentheses finishes. The Rebbe Rashab says that we can see this interplay between the mind and the heart in the sense that, when a person gets excited about something in their mind in a real way, in a deep way, where they really do take the time to meditate in this true way and they do build up this true excitement within the mind, that excitement gets translated into the heart automatically. The person doesn't have to like hype themselves up emotionally about something. It's going to be a visceral and immediate experience. And again, the Rebbe Rashab says that this is due to that power of attraction, the power of drawing, which is known as das. So das is this very, very powerful attribute, which again, we're going to talk more about tomorrow, which is what makes it all happen, what connects the excitement of the mind to the excitement of the heart. And then in conclusion, the Rebbe Rashab says that this emotional feeling within the heart that comes from the das, that the das makes it happen, actually starts out as being concealed. It's not a revealed thing. And it might not even be felt at first glance. Like the excitement will be there, but the person might not be necessarily aware of it. And so it's similar in a way to the excitement of the mind. So my understanding of what the Rebbe Rashab is saying here is that he's sort of alluding to the fact that sometimes we feel things, but we're not always necessarily aware of our feelings. So sometimes things don't hit us right away. Like we might have that feeling inside of us, but we're not aware of that feeling. So that's a next step. So it's like first we get the excitement within the mind about a concept, then that excitement automatically is going to cause us to feel something. And then there's the next step, which is this idea of actually, tapping into our feelings. And then there's the drawing of the heart, the Rebbe Rashab calls it, which rises up from below to above. And then the light comes from above to below in a more revealed way in the heart. So it's like kind of tapping into these felt feelings within the heart. And this ends up happening, this process of when we draw our heart up, our feelings upwards, and then the light comes back down, then this godly idea becomes felt and engraved within our heart. So that's the end of the chapter. And then in summary, again, the Rebbe Rashab gives a little summary here. He says that the summary of this chapter is we talked about the idea of how the true service is to really exert one's mind with a great connection. And through this will cause the excitement within the heart on its own. And what do we mean by the excitement within the heart? That there's going to be like kind of like a feeling of like a drawing of the heart, like mishichat halev, like the heart wanting to be close to God in this case. So that's it for today. And tomorrow we're going to continue along these lines when we get deeper into this attribute of das, this magical attribute of das, which really is what gets us to translate these intellectual ideas, to have them permeate inside of ourselves, and have them become felt in a visceral and real way, and ultimately lead to our self-transformation, which is the ultimate goal of prayer, as we've mentioned. So stay tuned for that, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.